Welcome to the Healthy Heart Show, where we pull back the curtain on conventional medicine and dive into the root causes of cardiovascular health. If you are concerned about high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart attacks, stroke, or atrial fibrillation, this is the place for you. We will provide natural heart information that will help you prevent, treat, and reverse any ailment, leaving pills and procedures out of the picture. Here are your guides to holistic heart health, board-certified cardiologist and Amazon best-selling author, Dr. Jack Wolfson, and natural heart doctor, naturopathic physician, Dr. Lauren Latanza.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Jack Wolfson, board-certified cardiologist at Natural Heart Doctor. Welcome to another episode of the Healthy Heart Show, where our focus here is on getting you the 100-year heart. So to get you that information, to get you on that path to the 100-year heart, I give you the best information and I bring on the best guests. And I've really got an absolute superstar in the holistic industry to bring on today. This is Dr. Frank Shallenberger, and I'll get into Dr. Shallenberger's, bio. But, again, when you talk about, some of these founding fathers of that really have paved the way for the next generation, maybe people like me, to be able to do what I do, to get that message of health and wellness out there. We've got Dr. Frank Shallenberger. Dr. Frank, how you doing, buddy?
I'm great. Thanks for the intro.
You got it. So Dr. Shallenberger, it's I love this because his bio talks about 6-time grandfather and 4-time father. And for those of you who are watching on video, we're streaming on video and then doing the audio. But behind me on my wall, I've got a picture that includes the names of my 4 children and my wife. And again, you can see Dr. Shallenberger leads off with his 6-time grandfather, 4-time father. And again, he's one of the originals, practicing medicine since 1973. I'm sure you don't feel like you've been practicing for that long. I know how time flies. Pioneer in alternative integrative medicine since 1978. He's licensed to practice in Nevada, where again he's got the conventional medicine license and also alternative and homeopathic medicine. So he's giving you the best of both worlds. He's taught thousands and thousands of practitioners. He's got 2 books that he wrote. One's called The Type 2 Diabetes Breakthrough and Bursting with Energy. He'll tell us how we can get a copy of that. He's also the editor of the Second Opinion Alternative Medical Newsletter. And again, pioneer in therapies as it pertains to mitochondrial health, as it pertains to the use of ozone and getting that incredible therapy. And we're going to be talking about all those again as we get in with Dr. Frank. Again, Dr. Frank, thanks so much for being on the show.
It's a pleasure, Jack. Thanks for having me.
All right. So listen, so kind of give us some of your backstory, if you will. So you start off, you graduate maybe in 1973, and then 5 years later, you wake up, something happens, pulls you out of the medical matrix, the pharmaceutical pill, surgical model. Tell us about that story.
Well, it's kind of interesting. All of us come into this different ways, and we just talked about how you got into it. But for me, it was a combination of things. Number one, after I got out of medical school, I went into emergency medicine. So I was one of those trauma docs, and we were putting tubes in everybody as the helicopters brought them in, that kind of deal. And I just, after about 6-8 years of doing that in the late 70s, I decided I think I want to have a nice life. So I'm going to try and get a day job. So that's what I did. I just hung out my shingle and I started treating people in more of a general practice type of setting. And, I had been so disillusioned being in emergency medicine because emergency medicine is so straightforward and it hits cause. And I've often told people, when you're an emergency doctor and somebody comes in with, say, a knife in their back, you don't give them some Prozac and send them home. You actually take the knife out, sew up the wound, and fix the problem. And so that's sort of the mentality that emergency doctors have. We're going to fix the problem. Well, I get into internal medicine and to family medicine, and I'm not fixing any problems. And in fact, all I'm doing is I'm treating symptoms, and that's great. Okay. But half the time, the drugs I'm given to treat the symptoms are causing other problems. And so I was, really disillusioned with that. I went to the head of the hospital there. I went to the department head of the hospital I was associated with. And I said, this is what I'm doing. What am I doing wrong? And they said, basically, after talking with me, they said, you're not really doing anything wrong. I said, but I'm not actually fixing people. And they said, well, yeah, we don't fix people in internal medicine. We just make them feel better. That's the deal. What are you getting so excited about? And I thought, that can't be right. That just can't be right. So my dad was a doctor at the time. And he called me up one day around this time. And he said, son, look, and see, he came up in the 30s. So he said, I got all these old books from medical school and from pharma and all these books. Would you like them? I said, yeah, send me some of these books. So he sends me this big old box of books. And the first book I pull out is a book by Ciba, one of the pharma companies. And it's a short little book, but in there, it goes through vitamins. Turns out that back in the 30s and the 40s, the pharma was into vitamins. They're not anymore, but they used to be. So I'm pulling out this book, and I open the first page, and it says thiamine deficiency. And I'm looking at thiamine deficiency, and it says fatigue, aches, moodiness. And I'm thinking, heck, those are my people. This is like what most people have, is this kind of stuff. I said, I wonder if they might be vitamin deficient. So that's kind of what got me into this. I subsequently got lucky in as much as I was in the San Francisco area, and Linus Pauling had a study group going on once a month there in San Francisco. So I got to meet with all these great guys, these early luminaries. And gosh, my mind was open. So by the time the 80s rolled around, I was kind of into it. And that's what brought me to looking for answers, something that maybe treated at a causal level instead of just the symptomatic level.
But I often say that, listen, the world needs plenty of emergency room physicians and trauma surgeons, but when it comes to actual prevention, the medical doctors have nothing. Like, the toolbox is totally empty. Their idea of prevention is statin drugs and blood pressure drugs and diabetes drugs and aspirin, and clearly that's just not the answer. What certainly, as you started looking at all of this, and obviously as your travails kind of go on through, like you said, through the 80s, and talking about hospital administration, right? You're talking about late 70s as that goes into the 80s, and that's just the golden era of insurance companies and Medicare, when the physicians and hospitals were just, it was a printing press of money going on, and then so tell us, maybe get into some of the headwinds you came up against as you're starting your career and going into this natural alternative, and all the blowback from your colleagues and stuff.
Yeah, it's a much better atmosphere these days. Back then, there was a lot of antagonism. If you even told your patient they shouldn't eat sugar, that was, there's something a little bit questionable about how intelligent you are. And so we did have to deal with things like that. But I'll tell you a funny story. Once, Linus Pauling had set up this group called the Orthomolecular Medical Society. And I ended up being involved in that. And in the early 80s, we had one of our first meetings. It was my first meeting, put it that way. So I'm in the audience there, listening to all the speakers and such, and I turn around and who's there but the chief of staff at the hospital. And all these guys are talking about is alternative things like IV vitamin C and so forth, so on. And I go up to him, I said, John, what the heck are you doing here? He says, look, I'm interested in this stuff, but don't tell anybody I'm here.
Yeah, it's true.
That's kind of the way it was back then. As long as you didn't tell anybody and you flew under the radar, maybe you were okay. It got into a little bit of problems eventually in the state of California. But those days are over, and it was a little problematic, especially with insurance companies. Insurance companies would just, if you didn't do anything by the book, they call that fraud.
It's amazing because you think insurance companies would want to, lower their outlay for those who are insured. And therefore, again, if you have a healthy population paying insurance dollars and you're not spending any of that, you would think that would be fantastic for insurance companies. But I guess you can only say that they're all kind of in bed together with insurance, hospitals, pharma, government.
It's almost a catch-22. I'm sure you understand this, but it's almost a catch-22 in the sense that what happens to the premiums? If the expenses go up, they don't care about the expenses. They just raise the premiums. And then now you get the government involved, and then it's like you said, printed money all over the place. So really, they're not motivated to keep the cost down.
Yeah. The when I wrote my book back in 2015, and I showed that to a lot of my cardiology buddies, and they looked at it, and they actually, some of them even read it, and some of them even commented, "We love your book. Everything you say, fantastic in there. Just don't ever mention my name that I ever approved your book." I got a friend who's the head of cancer at a huge East Coast university. He's the head of the cancer department. One of my best friends from osteopathic school, and again, he hears everything I have to say. He loves everything I have to say, but again, his job depends on him toting the company line, so he could never, break free from that. Which again, he could, and people like you again, and people like myself, we've taken the risk, we've taken the hits, and again, just to continue to bring truth to the world and the best way to stay healthy. So again, I appreciate you. I do want to, I guess I'll open it up to you, because I know I do want to talk about ozone, because I know you're one of the foremost authorities worldwide on ozone, but I do know that you do love to talk about mitochondrial health. So maybe do you want to set up the concept of ozone? But first, let's talk about, what are the mitochondria, and why are you so passionate about having healthy mitochondrial function?
About 20 years ago, I'm out riding my bike. And one thing about riding my bike is that my brain is like free floating. I don't, whatever pops in, And I'm just riding my bike, and I'm thinking about the fact that as people get older, the mitochondria function worse. And it's a known fact. Everybody accepts this. And that this is a major cause for disease, is maybe be the fundamental, ultimate cause for disease, is that the mitochondria don't work so well. And for listeners, the mitochondria are organelles in all of our cells. Our cells have thousands of these little guys, and that's where the oxygen's headed. So all that oxygen that we breathe in, which is obviously the most critical thing we can do for life, is breathe in oxygen. All that oxygen only does one thing. Very interesting. Unlike vitamins and minerals, which have a lot of things that they do, oxygen actually in the human body only accomplishes one thing, and that is it finds its way into the mitochondria of our cells, and the mitochondria are able to extract energy from that oxygen in a process called electron transport. Extract the energy from the oxygen, and that energy can be harnessed, and the cells use that energy to keep us alive. And I knew at the time that animal studies had showed that as animals get older, the ability for their cells to actually function, the functional aspect of their cells, remains intact, even to very old age. The problem is not that the cells can't do what they're charged with doing. The problem really is the mitochondria aren't working so well, aren't processing the energy efficiently, and the cells are getting less and less energy. They could do what they're going to do, but they can't because they're not getting enough energy. And so, and we have this phenomenon called aging, which is basically a bunch of cells that really could work well, but aren't getting enough energy to work well. And all I tell my patients is it's analogous to a flashlight with a bad battery. The flashlight could work really well, but you need to change the batteries. So we know about these phenomena. We know that cells can work even into old age, but they don't because they don't have enough energy. And the reason they don't get enough energy is because as we get older, for a whole bunch of reasons, the mitochondria won't process the energy, and that's so the whole thing. So I'm riding my bike and I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, yeah, the older you get, the less energy you're able to make. And then I thought then it just came into my head, what if the decrease in energy came before the aging? What would happen if the mitochondria became dysfunctional or lost their ability to react even before aging? So at that point, I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe that's the case. Maybe, in fact, if the mitochondria aren't working well early, and I'm talking in your 30s, that might predispose you down the line to aging prematurely and developing all extra vulnerability to diseases as we get older. So I thought, you know what? I need to find a way to measure mitochondria. So I started making some calls and doing some research into this. Found out, like, outside of strange research settings, there's no way to measure mitochondrial function. I'm thinking to myself, hey, this is the single most important thing I ought to know about myself, and I don't know how to measure it. So I thought, well, let's try and find some ways. So I won't go through the whole long story, but we tried a bunch of different ways. Turns out a really good way to measure oxygen is like so grossly obvious that I think most people have, like, it's gone right over their head, kind of. But that is, we put a mask on people, kind of like a scuba mask, and they're breathing through this device. It's connected to a pulmonary gas analyzer, which analyzes how much O2 is they're consuming, oxygen they're consuming, how much carbon dioxide they're putting out. Turns out that if you do those measurements under a proper protocol and use some very established formulas, you can really detail how well the mitochondria are working. So we developed this test, and I'm doing mitochondrial testing on all these patients of mine now, and they could be in their 30s, they could be in their 40s, they could be asymptomatic, they could be sick, whatever, and the numbers are just horrible. And so I'm calling back the company that makes the analyzer. I'm saying there's something wrong with this equipment. These numbers cannot be that bad. Well, what I learned was at that time that the numbers were in reality bad. There was nothing wrong with the equipment. But what I learned was all these numbers that we're supposed to see have been developed in two, like, really weird ways. One is all the published data is either on Olympic athletes, that level of human being, or on people who are ready to get heart transplants or lung transplants. These Joe Lunchbox in the middle, normal human beings, nobody knows about them. So that's all that's been studied. I'm here getting all this data, and I'm finding out Joe Lunchbox is flunking. He looks really bad. And sometimes even in the 30s, we had one study where something like 12% of healthy, asymptomatic individuals in their 30s had already had significantly poor mitochondrial function. And that's when it occurred to me, the mitochondria become dysfunctional first. And as they become dysfunctional, then they start to go into decay later on because they're at first dysfunctional. In other words, it's preventable. If you get it early, measure it, discover there's a problem, there's things that you can do to prevent that decay that ultimately comes down the line. And the really cool thing is, Jack, I've got people in their late 80s that now have the mitochondrial function of like a 35-year-old person. It's crazy what you can do with this. That individual never going to get sick, and he's going to be as functional right up to his last day.
That's tremendous. I definitely want to learn more about the technique and that you're talking about doing, and I think that's a fantastic thing to spread the news and information on. Are there any other tests that you use? Are there any blood tests? I mean, obviously you can look at different markers of inflammation, oxidative stress, the common things that most people, certainly in the functional medicine space, natural space, are checking into. Do you find any of those helpful, or are you talking about, no, we got to be measuring O2, CO2, exhalation, methodologies?
Yeah, I think that certainly all these other tests are wonderful. Whether it's an EKG or whether it's a blood test, whether you're looking at omega-3s, whether you're looking at vitamin levels, whether you're looking at iron levels, hormones, they're all critical to look at this. But I look at the mitochondrial function as sort of being the global assay. Because by the way, mitochondria are like extremely sensitive. So they're not only a global way to assess an individual, they're very sensitive. So anything from even severe emotional trauma to head trauma to lack of sleep, all of these things can almost immediately affect mitochondrial function. So if I get a patient and I test him out and his mitochondrial function are good, I can pretty much tell that guy, we're going to look at other aspects to see if we can even get you better. But the reality is your lifestyle is matching up pretty well with your genetics.
Amazing. Okay, as it pertains to, okay, so now we diagnose somebody with mitochondrial dysfunction. You and I could talk for hours about all the different modalities to be able to improve that mitochondrial function, obviously from nutrition to lifestyle to avoiding environmental toxins to supplements and techniques for detoxification. But maybe do me a favor, and the audience a favor, certainly. Enlighten us as to maybe some of the popular or what you find have been the most effective things that you've utilized to increase that mitochondrial function.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that's obviously the deal. So now I got this test and I find out people don't have good mitochondrial function. So now I'm looking for that magic bullet that's going to push them over the finish line. Reality is there's not very many magic bullets out there. We did do a study where it showed that parenteral B vitamins, of all the things that I tested, and I tested CoQ, I tested carnitine, I tested all the usual cast of characters that one would think of for mitochondrial function. And in terms of supplements and things that you can do, by far and away, it was B vitamins. Something simple like B vitamins. Now, in those B vitamins, of course, but there's several of them, particularly niacin. But there's niacin and there's riboflavin, which are cofactors for this whole mitochondrial process. B vitamins are churned up during stress. There's a little stress going around in our society. So I'm pretty sure that most people are not getting the adequate amount of niacin and B riboflavin they need. So I've always been big on that. But interestingly enough, in terms of supplements, and we could talk a little bit about peptides in a little bit. Peptides are different. But in terms of supplements, the only thing that I found that's really effective is B vitamins. Outside of that, number one thing, aerobic exercise. There's no two ways about it. That's not the only factor, but that's the number one critical factor. So if I see mitochondrial functions down, first thing I want to ask that patient is, how are you engaging in aerobic exercise? Do you have a regular aerobic exercise program going around? And we want to talk about that. The second one now really surprised me. And so it has to do with this. As the oxygen comes into the cell, in order for it to provide the proton that sets the whole electron transport chain going, it has to get that proton from either glucose or a fatty acid. That's where it gets it. Now, all of us can get it from either way. So in my body, my mitochondria can harvest that proton from glucose. It can also harvest that proton from fatty acids. But the reality is, when you look into it, that we're all different. And so you have some people on one side of this equation that can harvest the proton from glucose very efficiently, but not so much from fatty acids. Okay, so that person should have a diet fairly high in complex carbohydrates. They should not be on the high-fat ketogenic type of diet. They should be on the complex carbohydrate diet. On the other end, you have people that cannot efficiently harvest protons from glucose. They are the keto people. They want to be on the high-fat, low-carbohydrate type diet. So you got these extremes, and the rest of us kind of fit in between these extremes. But what's cool about doing this testing is, since the production of carbohydrate, the production of carbon dioxide varies between whether you're getting the proton from glucose versus whether you're getting the proton from fatty acids. It varies. I can look at that ratio of CO2 to O2 and tell you where you stand on that spectrum. So the number one thing that I found to improve mitochondrial function is exercise. The number two thing is finding the right diet. Because if you're a person that doesn't burn glucose well, and you get on that high carbohydrate thing, I could tell you some great stories. It's going to flat out suppress your mitochondria.
So is that what you do? Do you try people on, I don't know, say, a couple weeks of the high complex carbs and then test them, and then versus the higher fats and then test them and see which one kind of wins out?
There's a bit of that, but Jack, actually initially, right from the test itself, I can pretty much tell you where you are on that spectrum. just by looking at the numbers on the test, because it turns out it's a linear equation. It doesn't go up and down and vary like that. It's straight linear. If I look at those ratios, I can predict where you're going to be down the line. So I can tell the audience a really cool story that first got me going on this and nailed it down for me. But I had a guy come up from LA. He was a 42-year-old movie actor. He wasn't really working all that much these days. And so he's spending all his time in the gym, and he's from the Los Angeles area. So he's eating sprouts all day long. So he's got like this perfect type of lifestyle, so to speak. And the guy looks like Adonis. So he comes in and I test him out. His mitochondrial functions just stunk. And so I'm going back with my history and saying, okay, what's the deal with you? Well, it turns out that he does eat a Dairy Queen Blizzard twice a day. And so I asked him, well, why the heck, given your lifestyle, do you eat a Dairy Queen Blizzard twice a day? And he said, probably the best answer anybody could ever give, because I really like them. But anyhow, I said, that may be problematic for you. So let's just have you stop eating that Dairy Queen Blizzard. Let's change nothing else. I bring him back in 2 weeks, his mitochondrial function doubled. And I have seen this before. So part of what we can do is kind of what you say. You can get the test, put them on a keto diet, come back, redo the test. But I've done that so much now that I don't really need to do that. I can just actually look at the numbers and tell you where you stand on that.
How much does omega-3 play into the picture? I mean, obviously the answer is a lot. And there's been a lot of controversy about taking omega-3 fish oil supplementation, especially recently, increasing the risk of atrial fibrillation. I think the problem is obviously when you take a population of people who eat McDonald's cookies, cupcakes, and Dairy Queen, like you just said, and then you give them fish oil that's lousy, rancid fish oil, and they take no other vitamins, nothing else is healthy, you're bound to get lousy results. But to that end, I usually say to people, hey, sometimes we need to supplement magnesium and B vitamins. But a lot of times, again, we can just get some of this, the omega-3s from the seafood. So talk me through that again, as far as the omega-3 fatty acids, their role obviously in the cell membrane, in the mitochondrial membranes. How does that all play out?
Well, you got your omega-3 fats, which kind of a conglomeration of fats, and they're in most foods. But the thing I think most of us want to focus on is EPA and DHA. These are the fatty acids. The DHA is absolutely critical for neurological function. EPA is really critical for inflammation purposes. And so we're supposed to synthesize those. Unless you're eating grass-fed animals and or fish, you're not really going to get any EPA and DHA in your diet. You're going to get the parent oils from your grains and such, and then you're supposed to convert those parent oils into EPA and DHA. But you're absolutely right. They're doing these populations, and it turns out I measure EPA and DHA on every single patient I see, and I got to tell you, 80% of the time it's in the tank. It's absolutely in the tank. They can't synthesize it in a population. You're going to get some people that make plenty of EPA and DHA, and they don't need fish oil, for example. And then you're going to meet a whole lot of other people that don't hardly make it at all, and that could be a lousy diet. That's true. But a lot of it is just like diabetics. Diabetics, as a rule, cannot synthesize EPA and DHA, and you're almost never going to see a diabetic. So I'll bet if you start looking at studies of fish oil in diabetics, you're going to see some different numbers.
The Healthy Heart Show will be right back after we take this quick break to hear from our sponsor. Would you like to drink great tasting coffee that's also good for your heart health? Cardiology Coffee is your answer. This 5-star rated coffee is delicious. It's a gourmet coffee that begins with whole organic beans, hand-selected and carefully roasted. It's tested and certified to be free of pesticides, mold, and other toxins. Cardiology Coffee is great for your heart, and you're going to love how it tastes. Order now online at cardiologycoffee.com. Now back to the Healthy Heart Show.
As it pertains to the mitochondria, how much credence or when you're talking to people, do you put light into the equation? So infrared light, as it increases mitochondrial function, helps to really drive that electron transport chain from cytochrome to cytochrome. What I mean, do you get into a lot of the red light therapies, or even just telling people to just to get out in the sun and sunbathe?
That's a great story. I got a chapter in my book, Bursting with Energy, that deals with light, specifically sunlight. So that was my thing, is looking at sunlight, because I learned about this guy named Vincent in the early 1900s who had sun clinics in the Alps. I don't know if you've heard of this guy. And so he had it high in the Alps because it was above the cloud layer. So over there, apparently, there's a lot of clouds all the time. You can't get much sunlight. So he established these clinics up there. And I've had actual photos of this, and he's published data on this, where he's literally curing tuberculosis cases, erysipelas cases, all kinds of infectious cases, curing them by getting these people up there and having them sunbathe all day long. And the hospital rooms were such that they opened up the windows and rolled them out onto the patio. And he started them out with 5 minutes a day. And then each day they would increase it as they acclimated to the sun until they got to the point where they could take sun all day long. And the clinical results simply from doing that were astounding. So yeah, so light of all kind. I'm no expert on light. We do use some lights. I got some red lights in the clinic. I got some blue lights in the clinic. But I do encourage people to get sunlight, which to me seems like it's probably the best light. But I'm sure it's a mitochondrial inducer. It has to be.
I wonder why Dr. Fauci hasn't publicized the use of light therapy to support immune function.
He needs a patent on that. He needs a patent before he's going to push it.
I've seen the photos, and I've passed on the photos and shared them on social media, emails and stuff like that of the time of the Spanish flu, and how you're talking about Boston, and it's the winter time in Boston, and how they have the patients outside of the tents that they had set up just to make sure they were getting sunlight in the middle of winter in Boston, and everybody else is walking around. They're wearing heavy jackets and stuff like that, and the patients are all bundled up, but at the very least, their face, their eyeballs in the light, all that kind of stuff. All right. Again, you're such an incredible wealth of information. I respect, you so much and everything that you're saying. But I do want to, honor your time, and I do want to take the opportunity to jump into Ozone. So if you would maybe give me just a quick on what Ozone is, and why, of course, it's not, the ozone that we talk about in the atmosphere is different from medical grade ozone. And then cue me in as to how it helps people with cardiovascular issues.
Okay, so I think the quickest way for the lay people to understand this is, number one, ozone is pure oxygen. It's not contamination, as you were pointing out. And oxygen that we're breathing in, like right now, is 2 oxygen atoms stuck together. Ozone is when you take oxygen like that, what we call it O2. This is oxygen they breathe in the hospitals. We pump it through a machine, and then out the other end, about 2 or 3%, as this oxygen goes through the machine, changes from O2 to O3. So now we have 3 oxygen atoms combined together rather than just 2. Turns out that's an electron deficient molecule. It needs an electron. So instantaneously, it's going to want to have an electron. So keeping that in mind, what happens in mitochondria is they don't work so well, is they become electron deficient. So there's a more, if you look at NAD and NADH ratios, we could get more technically on this. But in overall, that's what the problem with the mitochondria are. They're electron deficient. So wouldn't it make sense to, their proton excess, which means that they need to remove electrons. They need to move the electrons. Doesn't it make sense to put in an electron deficient molecule? Because that's basically what it does. When you put that molecule in there, it oxidizes the NADH back to NAD, which stimulates the whole mitochondria thing. So in terms of therapies that we can use, besides B vitamins, to upregulate mitochondrial function, ozone is extremely effective at that. And you can give the ozone into the blood, you can give it into the rectum, you can put it in body parts, you can do all kinds of interesting things with it. It's a very utilizable substance. And it's, by the way, cheap, easy to use, and if it's used properly, absolutely free of side effects.
So the idea, again, by administering ozone, it seems to me what you're saying is that we kind of stimulate maybe this additional low level of oxidative stress, and that causes the body to increase its antioxidant capabilities, its antioxidant genes, proteins, and then therefore ultimately to actually, or paradoxically even, to lower inflammation, oxidative stress, which are linked to every condition in total, right? I mean, certainly every cardiovascular condition, every brain condition, every cancer condition. Is that what we're trying to achieve?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. You know, what people want to think of it is that oxygen molecule is going to go into your cell. It's going to get there. Now, either it's going to be processed through the mitochondria to produce energy, or it's going to be processed into free radicals. If it can't go the energy way, guess which way it's going to go? So we have study after study after study that goes back into another wonderful thing I love about ozone. It's got this huge history, by the way, but all these studies that very clearly demonstrate, and I can tell you some great stories, but that clearly demonstrate that the single most powerful way to decrease free radical production is ozone therapy. So by far, there's nothing that can come close to it.
Is there any danger, I guess, in, because it doesn't sound like in any way this is actually suppressing the oxidative pathways in the body? Because I think there is some concern about, in some of the literature, and that's all debatable as well, is that if we administer antioxidants, that kind of interferes with the body is doing all this oxidation and oxidative stress for a purpose, and that if we give a lot of antioxidants, it may actually inhibit what the body's trying to do if we do it exogenously.
I absolutely believe that, by the way. The secret, of course, is in the dose. You obviously need antioxidants, but you get too many of them, it's going to start suppressing out things. Once again, I could tell you a really interesting experiment I did once with a scientific colleague of mine that demonstrated this, but it's very clear in my mind. Antioxidants are critical, but high doses should only be used temporarily and in certain clinical situations.
There's been, some debate about NAC most recently, that I've seen. And again, the literature is so effusive on the benefits of NAC and obviously its ability to increase levels of glutathione. There's a few studies that have gotten a lot of publicity, and some people that some of this may actually increase cancer risk in some of these smaller studies. And again, you can criticize all those. I get it. And then of course, is NAC so beneficial that those who are controlling the situation want to, diminish the message of the benefits of NAC? I think that's a question as well. What, as it pertains to, again, the last 2 years and in the pandemic, there is a pretty good amount of information about ozone and its ability to keep people healthy in the face of COVID and whatever COVID is. And again, there's debate about what COVID is, but let's just say people are getting sick from something, and ozone appears to have a role in preventing hospitalization, ICU admission, and even mortality, right?
Yeah. So back in the mid 80s, there was an epidemic of whooping cough in Modesto, California. And I learned about this by reading about the newspaper. And they were talking about in this one school, elementary school, something like 60% of the kids that come down with whooping cough. Was huge. They shut down the whole school. So I'm reading this article and I'm thinking, now wait a second. 60% of the kids came down with whooping cough. That's huge. That's an epidemic for sure. Why not the other 40%? If this whole viral infection thing is about the virus itself, the other 40% got exposed to the virus. Why didn't they get sick? So I started thinking about this in the sense that there's got to be something more than the microbe itself. If the microbe is the problem, then everybody ought to get sick. And long about then, I did run into this guy named Peter Duesberg, and I don't know if you've heard of Peter. He's passed on now, but he was a pure genius. But worked at UC Berkeley, anyhow. Just did some fabulous work with viruses and such. And he said, it's not about the virus; it's about how we respond to the virus. And boy, he was right on. And so what I've learned about ozone to tie this all together is ozone makes you respond to the virus better, which is why when Franzini published his study only about a year and a half ago. So, by the way, with viruses, I knock them all out with this protocol. Every single one. It doesn't matter. I don't even care what the name of the virus is. It could be Ebola, it could be hantavirus, it could be influenza. I don't really care because the process is like always the same. It's not about the micro. It's not like a bacteria. A bacteria, it's about the bacteria. But a virus is different, and we cannot treat it. Like, there's no use diagnosing what virus it is. Just treat the condition that allowed the viral infection to happen, which has to, of course, to do with the immune system.
Yes, I mean, and in those studies, again, you referenced from Fresini again, like lower inflammation, lower D dimer. Those are all good things as we think about COVID is this hypercoagulable state and microemboli, thrombosis. So anything certainly that can lower inflammation, lower coagulation in that scenario is probably going to be beneficial. I know you talk a lot in your books and your teachings, again, about the use of ozone as far as arthritic conditions. There's a lot of dental holistic dentists that are using ozone for holistic dentistry, brain-based benefits of ozone. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, which is one of the first things. Yeah, I learned about ozone in the early 80s. I ended up going to Germany and I heard about it. And I thought, that's crazy. Ozone's an extremely powerful oxidant. Are you telling me that if you give somebody an extremely positive oxidant, you're going to save them from oxidant stress? Where's the sense in that? But the data's there. So I went over to Germany to check it out. I learned about it, learned how to do this. And I learned a lot just being there from these great professors that have been doing this for 20 years. And I came home and I started using it. And not long afterwards, again, I've got an internal medicine type practice. So I see people with all kinds of problems, from diabetes to cancer to whatever. They all get better with ozone. What's that all about? How can you get better with like 20 totally different diseases with the same exact substance? How does that happen? If it's not working on some extremely fundamental level, like mitochondria, like immune system, like circulation. And as it turns out, there's just a plethora of studies showing how ozone stimulates all these things. And we could get into endlessly talking about this. But anything that's probably good for you, is probably going to read about ozone stimulates that.
So the majority of people who come to see you in your clinic from all over the world are pretty much, are they all getting on some kind of intravenous ozone protocol? And is there anyone who ozone would not be appropriate for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So no, I don't put everybody on ozone. It's sort of a rescue remedy, if you will. It costs. It's cheap, but it still costs. Insurance doesn't cover it, and it involves you got to be in my office to get it. I got to stick a needle in your arm, so it's not as easy as it would be really cool if I just gave you a little pill of ozone. That'd be very cool. Then I put everybody on it. So normally what I do is I test their mitochondria. I look at their clinical condition, and if it looks like it warrants it, yeah, I'm going to pull out the bigger guns and I'm going to put them on ozone therapy. And if people were to come to my clinic, Jack, they would see a big old infusion room and like lots of people all day long going in and out getting ozone therapy all day long. They walk down the hallway, they're going to see people getting ozone via a sauna. They walk down the hallway a little bit further, they're going to see people getting ozone via a colonic. There's ozone all over the place in there. I'm shooting ozone into people's knees. I'm shooting it into their sinuses. I'm shooting it into the vaginas. I'm shooting it all over the place in another part of the office. There's ozone going on all over the place. But obviously, as a doctor, if I can find a simpler way to do something, I'm going to do that. For a lot of people, it's just a matter of lifestyle, about the things the doctors are already telling them. Yeah, don't eat the Twinkies. Eat something that's appropriate to you. Take some B vitamins. How about we detox off a little heavy metals? Oh, yes. And by the way, you need to exercise. Oh, really? Yeah, you actually do need to exercise. And if you do all these things, we'll bring you back, recheck your tests, recheck your mitochondria, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Dr. Shallenberger, tell me how can my listeners find out more about you and what you're doing? Obviously, the books you published, how to reach you, and how to see you in person in Nevada.
Well, first of all, I'd like to recommend they go to YouTube. And I've got a lot of stuff on YouTube, by the way. But one of the things that recently I put up there is called Disease is Optional. And it's a 5-part series. Each part is like 20 minutes long. And it goes into this whole mitochondria thing that we were just discussing, only in a lot greater detail. So if you go to YouTube and just search Shallenberger, Disease is Optional, that series will come up, and that'll teach you a whole lot about the mitochondria and the testing process. The other thing is that my book, Bursting with Energy, which is still in the old edition right now. The new edition's coming out in a couple of months. But that book is a pretty good book to read and help people to explain, why we want them to do these things. And, one of the things that I think all clinicians learn eventually is that most people will do what you tell them to do if they understand why you're telling them to do that. But when you go in to see a doctor and the doctor says, look, I want you to stop eating your Twinkies. I want you to start getting on your bicycle. I want you to do this, this, and that. But he doesn't explain why, you're probably not going to do it. So what's nice about the book, it's called Bursting with Energy, is it explains to people why these things that everybody's telling them are good for them, why in fact they are really good. And they're much more likely to stay with that. And I would recommend, you mentioned my newsletter, Second Opinion newsletter. If they go online and just plug in Second Opinion newsletter, that's a pretty good newsletter to kind of stay on top of some of the more interesting, because you said, well, Shallenberger, you've been out there for 50 some odd years doing this stuff. But it's funny, Jack, I think I'm like still in first grade. There is so much that I don't know, and it's so exciting. And one of the most fun things I have is making this newsletter, because there's all this new stuff coming up that even I don't know about this stuff, and so it's very exciting. But the newsletter is another good way to keep up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, I think about my former life as a conventional cardiologist and just how easy it was, right? Somebody comes in, blood pressure's high, here's pharmaceuticals. Cholesterol's an issue, here's some pharmaceuticals. You need an angioplasty stent, let's do that. Like, the toolbox that we have in those situations is actually very small. Now you get over into the causative space. Now you get into, holistic medicine, integrative medicine, functional medicine. And just as you said, like, we're all in first grade, there's this whole world, and it's like every day there's something new, which is exciting, but it can make it a little bit difficult for all of us to keep up with this information and modalities. So again, your book is fantastic reference, YouTube channel, Second Opinion newsletter. We'll put all these links in the show notes. And again, Dr. Shallenberger, I sincerely appreciate your time being on this episode of the Healthy Heart Show.
Hey, Jack, it's been great talking with you, by the way, and maybe we'll get together next time and talk a little bit more specifically about cardiovascular disease, because that's one of the slam dunks of ozone therapy is cardiovascular disease, and there's a lot of very interesting things we could talk about.
Well, I tell you what, we'll do that. We'll nail it down for next time. I think I would love to talk to you a second time to get the stuff to my database of heart healthy interested people. Dr. Jack Wolfson, cardiologist, natural heart doctor, another episode of the Healthy Heart Show. We will see you next time. Thank you.
That does it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Healthy Heart Show. Please help us get the word out by liking and subscribing to our podcast and our Facebook page, Natural Heart Doctor. Please show support for our podcast sponsor, Cardiology Coffee, your resource for organic, antioxidant-rich, mold and pesticide-free coffee shipped straight to your door. Learn more by adding @cardiologycoffee on Instagram and visiting cardiologycoffee.com. This podcast provides materials for information and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. We encourage you to contact your physician for any of the health issues discussed here.